Alright, I am back out in the garage. It's Friday evening. I worked a pretty tame week this week. I think when it's all said and done after tomorrow, I will probably have only worked about 60 hours versus the 70, 72 hours I've been working the last 4 or 5 weeks. So it feels good to be slowing down at work a little bit, a little more free time. And so I'm back out here, and we are going to make a template for the brush guard that's going to go right in here. I like to make a template rather than just start chopping some metal up, especially because I'm going to be bead rolling this panel, and depending on how much bead rolling I do, it can affect the shape of it. It can shrink it a little bit. And so what I usually do when I bead roll a panel is I leave the piece of metal full size, do all my bead rolling, and then I'll trim it down to size afterwards. So I'll make all my design elements, I'll bead roll them in, and then I'll stick the template on top of that, and then trace my outline, and then cut it. That way, like I said, sometimes if you bead roll first, it's going to shrink it that little bit, and then it won't fit how it fit before. So I have this piece of cardboard here. It's builder board, temporary floor protection. I got it at Home Depot or Menards, one of the big stores like that. I got a big roll of it. I like using this stuff for templates. It's decently thick, but it's easy to cut, easy to handle. So I'm going to take some measurements off of the front bumper, transfer them to the template. We're going to use the Pexto foot shear to cut it to size. We're going to check our fitment. If we need to make any adjustments, I can just, like if I make it a little bit skinnier than I actually want, I can take it over to the foot shear and just shear it right down the middle, and then widen it and tape it back together just an 1/8 inch wider or whatever we want. Can do that as well to correct the angles at the sides, just to kind of nail it in. And once I get that taken care of, then I'm going to use this piece of sheet metal. I know I was talking about using a piece of aluminum, but I don't have any, and I think I want to, instead of have the front bumper be gloss black and then having like an aluminum, brushed panel in there, I think I want to do a flat black or satin black panel on the gloss black bumper. I think that will look a little bit better with what I'm kind of going for with the vehicle. So I have this metal right here. Not sure the thickness, but it is a thickness that you can see it has some stiffness as is, so it's not super thin sheet metal. It is thin enough that it is going to bead roll nice and easy in my Mittler Brothers bead roller I have over here. I need to incorporate a license plate mount into the brush guard. In Minnesota, you have to have a front license plate on any vehicle. I could get around that by putting collector plates on this since it's older than 20 years, but I don't really want to put collector plates on it, so there's a whole different set of rules with collector plates, and so I'll just incorporate a bead rolled element that will mount the plate, and it is what it is. And then I'm going to either use a row or a couple rows of dimple dies to let some air flow through to the radiator and the condenser. I'm just going to freestyle that like I've freestyled other things. I kind of have a little idea in my head, but usually what I'll do is I'll make the template, get that fit up, and then on the template I'll just use a marker and start drawing out my idea, and hold it up and see if it's what I like and make any changes before we actually start bead rolling the metal. So let's take some measurements off the front bumper here. We'll transfer them to the cardboard, and once we have that template, we'll start designing. So here's the template. Got it all champed out. Fits up pretty good. Put some little radiuses in the sides. Those kind of give some clearance for the welds around the tubes. I'll show you how it fits up. Fits in there right like that. You can see it recesses just a little bit. It's not fully on the on like the inside of all the tubes. It's kind of more on like the 3/4 part of the radius, if that makes any sense at all. But so this is what we're gonna do, and we need to put a license plate in there. So I have a plate here that we can use just for kind of mock-up, and so I'm going to kind of play with it, see if I want it towards the bottom, in the middle, towards the top, or if I do it more in the center, I could have a row of dimples and a row of dimples above it, which might look pretty good, or I could also do a little recess on top and bottom with some mesh in that as well. I think, looking at this, that having the plate down here isn't going to work that good. I don't know that I'll like having a bead rolled element this close to the edge. I like maybe having a little bit more of a substantial border. It could work pretty good at the top. It would work pretty good there, and then I could have 2 rows of dimples, or I could have a nice big piece of mesh in there, maybe two recesses with some mesh in there, or maybe do even like you can see up here, that was just a practice panel. I could do something like that and then cut out some windows with some mesh behind that. That might be a little busy looking for such a small panel. So I think I'm going to try to center this up, center it in all directions. We'll trace around it. We will grab some dimple dies and see if we can space them nicely. It'd be nice to have maybe 5 down here and 7 up top, or if I want to use a little bit bigger dimple, we would do maybe 3 down here and then 5 up top. I just like to keep it either on center, or I mean it could do 4 and then do 6 so that there's some symmetry. So let's start messing around with this guy right here. Grab a couple measuring devices here, and we will make it happen. So let me grab a piece of paper for some scrap to be able to write on. Just keep using the same one I was using the other day. Let's measure the whole length. I think I put this to 16.5. 16.5 minus, let's just call that 6. It's a little long. So 16.5 minus 6. I don't even need to write this out, but it's good at least to be able to have some references. So we're looking at 10.5. If we divide that by 2, we are going to get 5 1/4. So we will measure up just shy of 5 1/4 on each end. Let me see if one of my other measures is going to work better. We'll measure out just shy of 5 1/4. On each end here, so let's just do a 1/16 shy. So I'll do 5 3/16. Make another mark. That's good. 5 3/16. Like 3/16. And let's see how we did here. So that is actually perfect. Now we want to get some side-to-side marks. So I'm actually going to continue the lower one, the full length of the template, since it is the smaller dimension here. Be able to take some measurements off of that. This is 16 3/16. Double check that. Yep, 16 3/16. And we are going to take off of that the length of the plate, which is 12 1/16. So we are left with 4 2/16 or 1/8. 4 1/8. We want half of that, so that is going to be 2 1/16. So we will measure 2 1/16. Two 1/16 to mark that out. And let's finish off this. Just a smidge there. Alright, so that's where our plate goes for it to be on center. I'm going to go grab my dimple dies. This is my set of dies. These are some Mittler Brother punch-in dies. So they punch the metal or aluminum. You punch the material and dimple it at the same time. They do have their limitations for thickness. You can do 1/8 inch aluminum, steel thinner. If you run into problems, they bolt together, so the one side is threaded, and you use I don't know, maybe it's like a 1/2 or something like that bolt, and you bolt them together. Another way to do it is to drill your 1/2 inch pilot hole, put the bolt through, and then use a shop press, which is what I do. Then you can deal with a little thicker gauge of material. I've actually stripped out the threads on a few of these, trying to work them beyond their capacity. They still have limitations for how thick you can get, though, because of the distance between the two dies. But these have treated me well. I've used these for lots of roll cages, lots of bash bars, lots of bead rolled panels, everything. I've had these for a long time. It was one of my first big purchases back when I started getting a little heavier into fabrication. So this I made when I was living out in California over at my buddy Kenny's shop. He was a woodworker, and so I just used some of his tools to make a little dimple die holder. It's come in handy, makes it a little portable. I dig it. So I'm going to figure out what dimples I want to use. Dimples are pretty badass, so why not use some dimples. This is an 1.5 and an 1 3/4. This is a 2 so I'm kind of just gonna do some eyeballing as far as what size I want. I think the 2 is gonna look really good. I could even go up to a 2.5 maybe. But the 2.5 is going to be too big. I actually want to not just bead roll this, but I want to recess it and then bead roll it just so it has that little extra flare. So I'm thinking actually this 1 3/4 will probably be the ticket, although this is going to be bead rolled around, so that leaves less than what our mark is by probably 3/4 of an inch. So the 1.5 might be ideal. Pretty small dimple, but with that recess and then the dimple in the middle, I think that will look real amazing. Alright, so here's what I did on the other side of the template after that first one I wasn't happy with. I started by making the element for the plate with the same width or height, and then from there I used an 1 wide ruler to set all the borders for everything. So we have an even border here, 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 and the sides, and so that leaves these 2 strips to have dimple dies in them. And so I think we're just going to, when we use the bead roller, we're going to use the step bits or the step rollers, and we're not going to go very deep or wide with the step, so that we'll still have plenty of room for the dimple dies themselves. So now what I'm going to do is grab the piece of steel. I'm going to trace the border, but we're not going to cut it to length. I'm just going to trace the border, and we are going to transfer all of these marks to the steel. Then we are going to start bead rolling. Once we're done with the bead rolling, then we will lay out our dimple dies, and we will figure out where we want to drill the 1/2 pilot holes for the dimple dies, and we'll dimple them. Then we will start mounting the panel. Here's the panel we're going to use. It is some cold rolled sheet metal. I like cold rolled. It doesn't have the mill scale that the hot roll will have. This is 16 gauge. We are going to transfer our template, remembering that this is now the bottom. I fit this pretty precise, and the angles of the 2 tubes were very close but slightly off, so I want to remember that if we do it this way, that this is now the bottom, and we will want to remember that for the direction that we are going to be bead rolling. I think what I'm going to do is use these measurements, but do it top. It's just easier to not make any mistakes. So I'm going to hopefully find the marker that I was using last time. We're going with what I got. So I'm going to use some magnets just to hold this thing down. We can get decently close to the edge here. I don't want to just go right up to the edge like this. We're only leaving a 1-inch border before we set the first bead rolled element. And if you bead roll too close to an edge, it can warp quite a bit. So ideally, if you just did it right in the center of the panel, you'd come out with the flattest panel. There's also a lot of other ways to keep your panel flat with pre-stretching or taking multiple passes. I am not going to get that crazy. So let's give this a mark, and again, we're not going to cut it right away. There we go. Chop it right about here. Just make a quick little mark, just for a reference, and bear with me while I chop this. There we are. That'll be quite a bit easier to deal with. Be all just right in front of me instead of trying to feed it. So now I'm going to mark the plate out first. We'll take measurements off of that. All right, we have everything laid out. All of our elements to bead roll. Now we can get the bead roller set up, and we can start pushing those 3 panels down. Bead roller is on. It's all set up. I got some dies in here that we can create a step with. They're made out of Delrin, so they won't leave marks on the sheet metal. It's especially important when you're working with aluminum. But since this is only 16 gauge, Delrin will work fine for it. Leaves a little bit of a softer edge. And this is the Jamie Jordan Signature Series bead roller. It has the adjustable top shaft, so you can adjust the distance between the 2 dies, and that sets how big the step is going to be. And then this clamps down on the top shaft into the bottom shaft, and that sets how deep your step is going to be. So it is time to start rolling some beads. I haven't bead rolled in a while. I really hope I don't screw this up. I always start after a bend and do the long straight part first. It's just easier to kind of get the rhythm going. One thing with the bead roller, to get all these equal, you want to count how many turns you're going. So this is where it touches the material, and so I'll grab my piece of paper here that I've been keeping all my notes on, and we are going to put this right on the edge of the marker line there after the bend or the radius is done. And so that's where it first touches. We're going to go one more. and then one more, and we're gonna see how that is. You can always go more, do the whole thing, and if you want it to be deeper, keep it in the machine, go another half turn, go another whole turn until you get the desired effect. It helps to keep the panel flat to go in multiple passes, and it helps with also, if you go full depth right away, you'll create a pinch that you can see that you either have to use a hammer and dolly to get out of there, or you just have to deal with. Sometimes it is hard to retrace your lines, especially when the step is not a very big distance, or depending on what dies you're using. If you're using like an actual bead die, then it's really simple to follow and retrace what you just did. It almost is like a train track. This is a little harder. You just have to go slow. This machine also has forward and reverse, and it also has a speed adjustment. So I'm going to just barely tap the pedal. This is 2 turns in from where it just barely touches. I want the panel to go away from me so I can guide the line into it. We'll see if it is set that way. It is set to go the other way, so we will reverse it to forward. And let's start rolling some beads. Do our best not to screw this panel up. It's best to be comfortable. I don't have a lot of experience with this. I don't use this all the time. So I get real down in tight with the machine. I generally kind of squint at it, and that's how I do it. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of talent with these things and can do crazy artwork. I'm not that guy, so. And that is actually barely doing anything, so I'm going to go, right now I'm going to go a whole nother turn, and we'll keep rolling here. That is doing a little bit of a step, still very, very shallow. I'm definitely going to want a lot more than that. So I'm going to go, so that was 3. We're going to go 4 full turns. And I think that should look quite a bit better. Now these radiuses are going to be the tricky spot. This is where, well, I mean, the big straight lines where you have, you know, everything has to be parallel. I guess everything's just about as important as the other, but the radiuses are where you can really lose control. So I'll be extra careful in here. Go very slow. I'm already getting a little off the line. All right. Right back into another turn. And these marks are so terrible I can't really see, so I'm just going to have to do what I can. And that's looking really getting back onto the part that we already bead rolled, but at a much shallower angle. So we're gonna have to be really careful and get right back on the same line we were on. It's not gonna want to trace itself. Alright, that is looking like a pretty good step. I'd like it to be a little deeper maybe, but we're just going to roll with that. I don't want to make these radiuses any worse. The tight radiuses, if you really don't nail them for the second pass, they start to kind of get a little faded or a little smeared, or I guess they start to get a little soft. So I'm going to roll this past where we had started. Now the thing to do now is, it was 4 from where we first touched, but we also, just to make sure, want to undo this and count how many. So if we undo this 7, then all we have to do is redo it 7 for the next part. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, and then it's loose. So we'll start down here. We'll get it all lined up. We'll look down the line. You don't want to have it crooked, clamp it, and then have to immediately straighten it. That leaves a lot bigger of a pinch. So I'll get this thing pretty close. And then we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now we're going to roll this panel. You always want to go a couple inches past where you started. It helps work out that kink that you created at the beginning when you were impatient and just went the full depth like I did. So now we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out. And yeah, there's definitely a kink right there. Not very happy about that. Now we will start on this guy. We'll go over to the foot shear and we'll take a couple cuts and then we'll finish trimming it. So I think this is gonna be too much. Yeah, the hold down, this part right here that comes down and holds your material, if I do it with the bead rolled parts down on the table, it's gonna leave some imprints. So I'm gonna have to pull the machine out. So that I can get it from the back side. I'm going to use one of the table stands I made, or I'm going to use one of the table stands that I used in the previous video to hold the panel at the right height. So when I go and chop it, it doesn't fall to the ground and dent itself. So I need to line up the cut here. So I'm going to hold on to it from the back side. Try to do this as unawkwardly as possible. Also want to cut this in one kick. Otherwise, if you cut it part way, it has a lot higher chance of you not being able to continue the cut and for it to try to fold the piece over, and then you've completely ruined it. So I'm going to do my best to put everything I have into it and get this thing sheared. This motorcycle's in the way a little bit, but we'll make it happen. All right, 3, 2, 1. Up. That worked out pretty good. Actually, now we need to get the other one chopped. All right. There we go. That's looking all right. Just do a quick little clean up with the file. This leaves a pretty good edge on it, but like I said, this I haven't adjusted it in a little while. Last time I adjusted it was in the winter, so it is not cutting tip top. No. All right, we're gonna give this a chop and hopefully it falls down into the bin cleanly. All right. Yep. Not too shabby. And if we can get that last cut, then all we'll have to do is use the Beverly shear, or we could just hit that with the flap disc on an angle grinder and get that radius perfect, which probably what I will do. All right, I like that. Having this little material bin that I made helps out a lot. You can see I added that flap to the back, so most things that I shear off will fall down into there, be saved from hitting the ground and ruining an edge on it. Most of the time the stuff that comes off the back side is scrap, not the actual piece we're using, but you can see how this piece is. And so we'll nip off those corners a bit. I think what I'm first going to do is I'm going to clean off all the marks and put some fresh marks on the corners so it'll be a little bit easier to see. We'll get those radiused and cleaned up, and then we'll start on laying out our dimple dies. Okie dokie. I have the panel here. Got it a little bit cleaned up. I deburred the edges with a file. I rounded them. Fits up great. So now it is time to roll some dimples, or punch some dimples into my recessed elements here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some blue painter's tape and I'm going to tape over them so that I can use a pen and mark it to take measurements a little bit easier, and we'll get started. And I'll use a marker to feel out the edge here. Should kind of find it on its own. Alright, now we found the center of that panel. So let's find the center in the other direction. We're going to transfer punch them. Not transfer punch, center punch them. Right there. So these guys are just about 2.5 away from each other on center. I'll center punch this. Now we will switch to the other side here. Alright, so I got 1/2-inch holes drilled where we did the center punches. And now we are going to use the Mittler Brothers punch and dimple dies and my cheapo Harbor Freight shop press to press the dimples in. There's a male and a female part. The female part has the cutting die go into it, and so you put the male part in the direction that you want the flare to go down. Guess that left a little burr. And I'll screw in the back side. Doesn't need to be tight. We're just using the 1/2-inch bolt as a center finder basically. And I will flip this over, get it on top of one of my spacers here. Get that guy loaded up, get it centered up, and we will do our first punch. That's the punch part going through, and now it's dimpling it. I put a lot of pressure on this just so after it dimples it, it will straighten the panel back out a bit. Hopefully it doesn't interfere with the bead rolled element. It's very close. Now I'll take some pressure off, and we will move to the next one. I'll remove dimple die, and you can see there is our dimple. There we have it. There is our panel. All we need to do now is get the plate back on it, center it, make 4 marks for center punches, then drill out the holes and install some nut certs, and then we can mount the plate up in a proper fashion. I'm also going to take a file and deburr these dimples. I've used all these dimples hundreds of times each, so over time they do start leaving some burrs. You can see on the back side it's really not too bad. Quick file up, no big deal, and it'll be good to go. So that's how you dimple die a panel. Alright, the panel is ready for some nut certs or rivnuts. I took a file and cleaned up the dimples so there's no burrs on that. I drilled these holes to 25/64, which is the size of our rivnuts here. These are metric for M6 fasteners, and we are going to be installing the rivnuts. I guess I should fill some people in that might not know what a rivnut or a nutsert is. So this is a threaded insert that you rivet into place, and then you can bolt whatever you want to it. These things are incredibly handy when you're doing any type of fabrication. You can get metric, standard, you can get really small sizes up to pretty large sizes. They make various kits from just a handheld crimper to a hydraulic handheld crimper to even an air-powered pneumatic one. There are multiple places that you can get them from, but I always get the actual rivnuts from McMaster-Carr, which, if you don't know what McMaster-Carr is, go to mcmastercarr.com and you will spend hours there. They have just about everything you need, from polishing, grinding discs. They sell tools, machines, rivnuts. They sell any fasteners you want. You can get an M8 fine thread dome cap or 12-point socket in various grades. You can get any type of fastener you're looking for. I'm going to be installing these rivnuts with this handheld hydraulic rivet setter. I got this set up from a company called HammerFab. There's HammerFab right there, hammerfab.com. They make these kits up that come with the parts you need, so I can do M4, M6, M8, M10, and all the standard sizes. But they also make a lot of really cool bits for this handheld riveter. So this one right here is a set of dimples that dimple for a countersunk screw, so a screw head that has the 37.5 or maybe it's 45-degree angle, and so you can dimple that into the panel so that it stays flat. They also make these ones, which are to recess the rivnuts so that the panel that you're bolting to the rivnuts can lay flat, because the rivnuts have a little shoulder to them. But for the license plate, it's not going to matter, because the license plate has this little bit of bead rolled right here, so the rivnut will fill up in that space. There's no reason to countersink the rivnut. They also make dimples for Zeus fasteners, stuff like that. Very awesome company. They make a lot of really cool stuff. They're really talented metal fabricators. Check them out on Instagram, go on their website. Now I will throw some rivnuts in here. So you just screw it on. I'm going to make sure that all the threads are engaged at least. You don't necessarily have to screw it in tight like this. Especially sometimes when you're screwing these in blind, you have to, there's not much room behind the panel. But I'll just put it about halfway, close up the distance here, and then we're going to insert it into the panel, make sure it is flat and square, and I will aim this up here so we can get a view of the back side, and I will just start pumping away on the hand pump, and you can see it is crushing. These rivnuts have this serrated edge, so they grab the panel a lot better. Some rivnuts tend to spin. If, for like a license plate, you don't need to bolt it in tight, so it's not necessary, but if you're actually bolting something in that's, somewhat structural to these things, you want to make sure that the rivnut is not going to spin. Lots of times, if you do get a rivnut that starts spinning, then you can't get the fastener out, and you have to just drill out the whole assembly, and it's kind of a pain. But this hand riveter works amazing. So once it's all set, there's a button on the bottom here. You press that, and it releases the pressure. Then you screw out the stud here. And there you go. There is one rivnut. Good to go. Now we will throw the rest of these guys in here. we go. There is one mostly finished panel. The only thing I'll have to do is punch some holes in it for the mounting, so we can line some tabs up with it. But there you go. I think it actually turned out really nice. Most of the little issues with it that I see, I don't think most people will ever see. And this plate should mount right up. It'll look pretty damn good on there. There we are. With them new wheels. JD, I'm tight.